All right, and now the part you've all been waiting for, hopefully. Working on projects. Go ahead and address that question really quick, though, because it's an excellent one. We've been as we talked about projects and frameworks and all these things, these are really examples of what are called design patterns, which are general ways to approach a common development problem. Are there anti-patterns? Yes, I would say there are. There's not the same sort of like list of them exactly that is in textbooks and everybody agrees on the way there is with design patterns, but there's definitely anti-patterns. I'll leave it at that for now and be happy to talk about it more later. Basically, anytime there's a concept called technical debt, which is basically when you develop something and you do it a little bit quick to get it out the door, you might do things that you cut some corners. And then if you or somebody else comes back later, you might be confused by the code. It might not work predictably. And anything that leads to too much technical debt is, in my book, an anti-pattern. All development causes technical debt. You can never get away from it, but you need to be aware of it and come back to it and sort of pay down your technical debt on a regular basis. Otherwise, after a year or two of working on something, you have this ugly pile of spaghetti code and nobody can figure out how it works and you have to throw it out and start over. So on that uplifting note, projects, let's write projects that aren't spaghetti code. So let me go ahead and share screen again. Spaghetti. Yeah, spaghetti's tasty. Spaghetti code, not so much. Just means it's hard to follow the logic. Like you can't follow a single strand of spaghetti, right? So you can't follow, like, why is X 2? I have no idea. And then you have to read like 10 different files and go through a bunch of import statements. And X is 2 because of this, and all of a sudden you've lost 4 hours. Anyway, you'll experience that sooner or later if you've not already. Everybody seen my browser with the Slack and everything? I'll assume so. Speak up if not.
Yep, we're seeing it.
Great. So what are we doing? Well, I'll even just start with Heroku.com. We are going to start the process of building a portfolio. And building a portfolio means building applications and putting them out there for people to look at, not just have a GitHub repository. Heroku is not the end-all, be-all of this, but we chose it for you to get started because it's really very good for getting started. Essentially what they do is they provide a layer on top of actually AWS. They don't run maybe they run some of their own data centers these days, but I think largely they actually, the computers are at Amazon. But what they do is they make it easy to deploy applications using languages and these sorts of frameworks and these sorts of languages. And you might recognize the little Gopher here. This is Python. They even support PHP if you are so inclined. And of course, JavaScript. This is Ruby on Rails. Anyway, so what I suggest you do is, and you don't have to do this right now, we can do it after we talk through this, but as your exercise this afternoon, go ahead and go to Heroku and get signed up. It's pretty painless. They shouldn't require a payment up front. You don't have to specify a company name. You can leave that blank. Primary development language really doesn't matter. It doesn't commit you to anything. It's just for their data, I guess. So select whatever you want there. But go ahead and get signed up if you're not already. And then what you're going to want to do is, I'll go to the documentation. There's this website, devcenter.heroku.com, that has really actually very good tutorials for all the different platforms they support. I'll show a little bit of the Node.js one. They've got all sorts of documentation. They have their own jargon. They're kind of their own universe. Instead of like virtual machines or instances the way you'd get in with most hosts, they have a concept called dynos. So they have something called the cloud platform, and they have managed runtimes. Let me make this bigger. They have managed runtimes that they call dynos, and your free tier can run a dyno for up to 450 hours per month, which if you do the math is most of the month. I don't know if it's quite, I don't think it's quite 24/7, but it's a healthy chunk of the month. And so you'll be deploying a dyno that basically is a receptacle for you to push an application to. And then you push the application a lot like you push your code to a GitHub repository. In fact, I believe Heroku is kind of built off Git and can connect to Git repositories fairly well. I'm not going to be showing all that, but if it's something you're interested in, I encourage you to read up on it. The other thing to know about Heroku is besides the dynos, they have a whole sort of ecosystem of different services that they offer. They call this elements. And if you go to their elements section, you see that they basically integrate with a bunch of other services. And let me go specifically to add-ons here. So most important, the add-on that you'll definitely be using from the get-go is some sort of data store. And so they have Postgres for a relational data store. They have, where's Mongo? I know they have they have Mongo for non-relational. They have Redis. They have all sorts of things. And most of these, at least I checked Postgres and Mongo, have a free tier as well. So besides 450 hours of dyno, you can also get about 500 megabytes of free Mongo storage, right? And you can get that all through the same service and integrated together fairly painlessly. So back to this, once you get to the dev center and you're looking at Node.js,
Aaron,
and
can I ask a question? Did you
yeah,
say 500 gigabytes? Or
no,
500
megabytes, 500 megabytes. The
Thank you.
free tier is they call it hobbyist, basic, whatever. It's not much. It's enough for what we're doing this week. But if you end up writing a larger application, I've been talking with Austin and others about getting you all some free cloud resources on some platform or another. It probably won't be Heroku. Heroku will just be the easy way to get used to pushing stuff. But more on that in the weeks to come. So each of the different platforms that Heroku supports has a pretty nice getting started guide. I'm not going to click through the whole thing. This is basically your exercise to do yourself this afternoon. But you can start. Apparently, if you're logged in, it can even save your progress. If you're into that sort of gamification. You download a CLI. You can probably also install this with Brew or whatever, if like a package manager, if you prefer, depending on your operating system. But the command line interface for Heroku will be the main way you'll interact with Heroku. You can log in from the command line, and then later on, you'll see, I'll skip ahead, like to deploy, Heroku create is how you create an application. And then you actually, you really do push with Git. So Heroku becomes just another upstream, another Git repository that you push your code to. And when you push to Heroku, when you push to GitHub, it just goes to GitHub and you can look at it and, have a code review and that kind of thing, make pull requests. When you push to Heroku, it actually starts running it, and it even gives you a URL that you can then go look at and see your running application. So that's what's cool about Heroku. And then Heroku Open will even just open that URL for you. So you'll get to this. That's skipping ahead a bit. But that's at a high level the goal for today. Are there any questions about that? And then I want to sort of talk more motivationally about the week and about the direction we'd like to see you go with projects in Capstone. I'll go to the Slack in case there are questions. All right, so again, playing with Heroku will be your main task. Basically, once we stop chatting right now, you'll be doing that the rest of the day. I'll be checking in throughout on Slack, and maybe we'll have another video Q&A at the end of the day. But the goal is to go through the complete Heroku tutorial for, I would suggest Node.js, and then see what you get. Now, before we continue, I wanted to show you, just to motivate a little bit more, what you can do with Heroku. This is an application that I developed at this point a few years ago. It's actually with Meteor. It'll look familiar to you because it's JavaScript and Meteor is based on Node, but it's kind of its own thing. I'm not saying use Meteor. I'm not saying not use Meteor, but what I'll say about Meteor is it's kind of niche. You won't find that many jobs that say, we're looking for a Meteor developer, right? Node is bigger than Meteor, But Meteor is kind of cool. If you're actually talking to somebody who knows about web frameworks and you say, hey, I made something with Meteor, they'll probably go, oh, that sounds cool, or was it fun, or whatever. So Meteor has more opinions and makes sure that the front end and back end are both pure JavaScript. And what this Meteor application, which is deployed on Heroku, does, and you can even get pretty URLs. You don't have to use that long number thing. You can reserve a prettier subdomain of Heroku for your application. Now, one thing you'll notice, it's taking a little while to load up this first load. Why is that? That's because on the free tier, Heroku puts your applications to sleep if you don't use them for a little while. So it took like 10 seconds to spin up. Loading it again, it should load faster, but it's just something to be aware of. If you pay for Heroku, that doesn't happen, but that should be fine for now. So what does this do? Very simple, but this is something actually real time. It uses the Twitter API, and I'll talk more about APIs in a bit. I've played with the GitHub one, though, so you should know what I'm talking about a little. First, it pulls the things currently trending on Twitter. So apparently, Lord of the Rings is trending. I have no idea why. We could search and find out. George Herbert Walker Bush, I think, is having some scandals of some sort. These are sports people, I would guess, usually when I don't recognize them. Bill Gates, I think, he wants to develop a smart city, I think was the news story. Anyway, stuff that's happening, right? People are probably upset with Keurig somehow. I don't know. So it pulls what's trending. And then for each thing that's trending, it pulls, if I recall, and we can check in the code in a second, 100 tweets, just random public tweets or recent public tweets about it. So, okay, Lord of the Rings is trending. Let's get some recent tweets about Lord of the Rings. Then it takes all of the words from all of those tweets and it throws out really common words like puts them in sort of a bag, like a set, and does a very simple sentiment analysis. Really, all it's doing is it's counting up the number of good positive words and the number of bad negative words according to another package. I did not write it. I did a little bit of due diligence to make sure that it made sense, but sentiment analysis is really hard to do correctly. Words can be good or bad depending who's saying them in the context. The word sick can actually mean like really cool, or it can mean awful and disgusting. So it's hard to do sentiment analysis. But what hopefully works here is even if the package gets things wrong, as long as it gets more things right than wrong, we're looking at 100 tweets, and then we average up how many good versus bad words there are in terms of sentiment in each tweet. And so what this means is everybody tweeting about Lord of the Rings has on average half of a good word in it, right? Whereas everybody tweeting about Bush right now has on average a little bit more than one bad or negative word. So people don't like Bush that much right now, and they kind of like Lord of the Rings. It's not really strong. None of these are huge positive sentiment. Very big negative sentiment for Piazza, whatever Tim is up to. Positive sentiment for Bill Gates.
Sorry, could you scroll back up to the Piazza one?
Sure.
Oh, different Piazza.
Yeah, no, it's not that Piazza. So I included links. We can click through and see if we can figure out, well, whatever it is, he's somebody who died. So it's not negative sentiment about Piazza, but this story about Piazza. I guess he's a fraternity member who died. And so it's kind of a bad story, negative sentiment about this story. If this application would be more sophisticated, if it figured out, it's not that people don't like Tim Piazza. People don't like Penn State University because of what they did to Tim Piazza. But the application isn't quite that sophisticated. Still, it's kind of cool. You can click through to figure it out yourself. You can see it's extremely simple. I did absolutely no work in terms of making this pretty. I loaded a very, very basic Bootstrap template and just threw things together using simple CSS rules. It tells you when it updates automatically, and it links through to the source here, which is just that GitHub repository that I already showed you that describes how to clone and run it yourself locally if you want, how to set up the API credentials so it actually can pull from Twitter, and that's about it. I'm not going to do a full tour of the code base here. If you're curious, I encourage you to check it out. The way Meteor structures things is client basically means front-end code, server means back-end code. Both client and server are JavaScript. Server is kind of Node.js-like, but it's not Express, it's Meteor, so it's a little bit different. You can just sort of see, there's a startup function, and then, you publish, and I'm not going to go into details how it works. Client is where the actual template lives, and the little bit my great CSS style, right? Padding top. Apparently, that's the only CSS rule I wrote. And then a little bit of front-end JavaScript that deals with reloading things, and that's about it. So it's an extremely simple application. I don't even know, maybe 100 lines of code total. If you add up across the different files, 100, 200. It's very simple. It depends almost entirely on just hitting the Twitter API and then using this particular sentiment analysis package that I found on NPM that seems to work pretty well. And that's about it. But yeah, it's kind of cool. You can look at it, and it's deployed to Heroku. Because this is Meteor, the way it's deployed to Heroku is a little bit different than in their documentation. It uses what's called, if you go to build packs under elements, these are basically recipes for deploying things to Heroku. And there are recipes for deploying all sorts of things, including Meteor. I don't see a search here for some kind of annoying reason, but if you look through here, you could find Meteor probably, and I just used that build pack to help me deploy it. So that was just a demonstration of the sort of thing you could build and what it looks like to have an application live on the web. This has been live on the web for a few years now, I think about 2 years. I had to touch it about a year ago, and Heroku sent me some sort of complaint that I need to update Node, so I probably need to actually redeploy it again at some point. But for the most part, this has just been running, and I can just show it to people. And if I'm in an interview and they're like, what's the sort of thing you've developed? I can say, here's something I've developed, and here's how it works. And so it's helpful to have these sorts of things. I'll take another break right here. Any question? Oh, there's a question. So Heroku, yes. And that's exactly the appeal of Heroku. And I totally skipped GitHub Pages. I kind of want to work that back in, but I wanted to hit the ground running on projects first. Basically, GitHub Pages is just static content, and so it's just the front end. It's good for pure React applications, and it's good for blogs and resumes and portfolios. If you make multiple applications, you might put a static page up on GitHub to link to them, right, and to document them a bit. So that's good. But Heroku actually runs the full thing. Heroku is running the Mongo instance that this depends on. This doesn't actually save data long term. I didn't really bother to do that. I put it under, I think, the, what are some interesting things I could do later? It's like, oh, I could show history, past trends. I'm not doing that right now. This is just what's present. And if you refresh it or just wait, it changes over time. That's just what it does. You can see it already changed since we last looked at it. But yes, this is all run on Heroku, and they provide sort of the full package for hosting this sort of simple application. Any other questions about, oh, that's why there's Lord of the Rings? That is cool. Okay, I did not know that. Amazon is making a Lord of the Rings prequel series. Wonder if they're getting any of the same actors. Anyway, please no. Well, all right. Any other questions about Heroku, about the little application I demonstrated, anything like that? Does everybody feel kind of ready to go to Heroku.com, sign up for an app account, and start working through the Node tutorial? All right. Thumbs up under thumbs up. I'll take that as a good sign. So I can, all right. Let's chat directly. So the Node tutorial will give a sort of starter app, but one thing I'd want to encourage is to, if you have a working app from the projects you've worked on already at Lambda School, you should try to push that instead or afterwards. If you don't, that's okay. But if you do, try to just put that out there. And then, hey, your Lambda School app is out there. And I bet you, if you tweet it, the Lambda School Twitter will retweet it or something and generate a little bit of buzz. If you've already done all this sort of stuff, chat with me after I'm done talking here, and we'll figure out where to go from there. But that's not a bad place to be. I would say start thinking hard about what full stack application you want to build. And that's another thing. I don't want to lecture too much this week. I want to give most of you time to work on things. There will be a brief lecture, but not homework, from Beej on Wednesday, I think, about relational databases, because for some of your applications, using Postgres might be a better idea than using Mongo. But other than that, I don't want to lecture a lot. I would like to meet one-on-one for like 15 minutes with each of you over the course of the week, just to check in and sort of brainstorm with you about project ideas, try to see what motivates you, get you all to build something. The goal here, you start by deploying whatever basic template in the Node.js Heroku tutorial or whatever application you built earlier at Lambda. But eventually, what would be great is for all of you to find something that you like, something you think is cool and want to work on. You've seen the sort of things I like working on, Twitter sentiment and encrypted notes and stuff, and find something like that for you. And it's fine if it's along those lines too. Whatever floats your boat, and then build that out and get it out there as a sort of unique little portfolio entry. It's also great to work together. Share what you're doing as you're doing it and collaborate some as you go. And if you also build a purely collaborative project, a few of you, that's fine. But I would encourage you to still have at least some unique your portfolio entry that when you apply to a job or whatever, you can sort of point to and say, I made this, right? So do both if you have time or inclination. But if you just do one, think hard about something you'd like to do. So if there are no other questions, there's one last thing I wanted to show as sort of motivation along these lines of to get you all thinking about what applications you could potentially be working on. I'll go ahead and post this link here too, so you can look at it. So, and if you look, you'll find lots of lists like this. I just picked this one because it was really easy to browse and it seemed well sorted. But something that I would encourage you to think about, this is not at all mandatory. It's totally possible to come up with cool application ideas that do not depend on any public or external API. But, you saw like with my little Twitter app, it was like 200 lines of code, but it did something real. How did it do something real? Well, it depended on data from Twitter, right? Depending on an API can be a great way to make your app do something kind of interesting, whether or not you actually have any users or you sink a lot of time putting unique data into it. There are certain sorts of applications that don't need this at all. Let's say you want to make an application that lets somebody like generate a random maze or draw a procedural illustration that looks cool or something like that. That doesn't necessarily need an external API. But if you want something that pulls in the news or information of some sort, that's when you start thinking about APIs. And this is just a curated list of a bunch of APIs out there. There's a dogs API, apparently. So dog.ceo. So you can, this looks kind of like the documentation for the GitHub API. You can get lists of dogs and random images of dogs based on breeds. If you like dogs, right? So there's a random, now note, this returns JSON with the link to the picture, but I bet if we look at this should be a picture of a dog. Yeah, there's a dog. So all sorts of APIs, anime, books, art. Now business, these ones are actually potentially useful. A service that does something based on the Google Analytics API you could sell that depending what it does, right? If it's like generate a nice summary of your analytics sites or whatever. Calendars, file storage, cryptocurrency, blah, 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 blah. All sorts of great stuff. I encourage you to skim through this. Games, pretty much every major modern game has a nice API these days. That's why there's so many wikis and sites built on them. Geocoding, you can make a geocoding sort of game, all sorts of stuff. Public awareness stuff, regulations, these sorts of things. A lot of that is accessible via an API. Health issues. Anyway, I'll stop scrolling and talking and just say there are options. I encourage you to look at these, and if any of them sort of inspire you, like, yeah, I'd like to build something that uses data from this, then I encourage you to check it out. Now you'll find, as we found with GitHub, that APIs vary in terms of stability, documentation, packaging, and the like. So you'll have to do a little bit of work to figure out if the API you find does what you want it to, and you might have to check 2 or 3 before you settle on one. But I just wanted to share this sort of resource with you all. So any questions on that, first off? So, I mean, I want to say at least one. I'd rather that everybody had one good, polished personal project that they're excited about. Like that would be a good place for any one person to be. If you get beyond that, that's great. And if you'd prefer to have like 2 or 3, because you have a variety of interests or whatever, and you'd like to get a few of them to the sort of minimal stage and get them out there, that's not a bad approach to take either. I think that though the way I would phrase it is at least one that you spend some time thinking about and that you like and that you can talk about and like relate, give anecdotes about in an interview. And then beyond that, other ones that interest you or collaborative ones. Like let's say you do one that you really like, and then you're like, okay, that was cool. Now I'm going to work together on another one with somebody else, something like that. This was, well, I guess it's on the screen. How many projects should we shoot to complete is the question. Any other questions? As far as I know, yes. Now, the rough plan for this week is to get comfortable first with Heroku, a little bit of relational databases, and as I said, meet with each of you to get an idea that you want to work on. And then hopefully, I mean, if the more progress you make, the sooner, the better. But I think the timeline we'd like to see is then by early next week, you're really sort of working on that idea. You're comfortable pushing to Heroku, and then we're going to show other more powerful but more complicated cloud platforms. Don't sign up or worry about those yet. In fact, in particular, DigitalOcean has like a referral process, so don't sign up for that until we figure out how to give you free DigitalOcean money. But if I had to guess, I'm going to say I think that you guys should probably learn to use something like DigitalOcean. There's also the Google Cloud Platform that you've already used a little bit. By the way, something I wanted to call out as a reminder, I hope you turned off whatever Google Cloud Platform thing you deployed, because otherwise it's going to keep charging money and work through whatever free balance they gave you. So you might want to double check that. But that's the progression I would say. Work with Heroku some, work with DigitalOcean, and then work with something like Google Cloud Platform or AWS. And the whole time, also be working on developing your application. And in principle, your application should be deployable to any of these platforms. The details will vary a little bit, of course, but they're just different models for deploying and maintaining and paying for an application. Heroku, because it's managed, is a little more expensive when you actually have to pay to scale it up. Any other questions? Oh, how do we, honestly, I would have to log in and poke around the Cloud Console myself to find it. I think it's in the documentation here. So this is I'll link this. At the bottom, if you type these things, hopefully it does that. Sure. Honestly, I don't know that there's a hard decision about that. I mean, I don't think, oh, apparently that lab has changed also. So potentially chat with Sean if you're confused about turning off your Google Cloud stuff. I can try to figure it out too, but I've not looked at it at all. So I don't really know what you did. As far as next week, there's not going to be like formal lectures, and there's going to be mixed availability, I think, of people, instructors and such. But yeah, I mean, certainly keep working on things. Totally up to you. I think that's a good way to put it. If you have the time between bites of turkey, definitely work on things. Honestly, I find myself, I usually write the best code when I'm kind of not actually surrounded by the regular, all the interruptions of regular work. I actually like having focused blocks of time. And so if you find a few blocks like that, might be a good thing to do. Yes, in theory, you could do that. But again, remember, if you're thinking of like deploying the static HTML to GitHub, like GitHub pages, you wouldn't want to use an authenticated API because you'd have to put the key for the API in that front end, like jQuery or whatever. And so it would just be out there, and that's not a good thing. If it's an unauthenticated, if it's a public API, and there definitely are completely no, you don't need to authenticate to get Chuck Norris jokes, right? You can just get Chuck Norris jokes, evidently. Let's get a random Chuck Norris joke. Chuck Norris killed a tiger. Now Rocky Balboa is the eye of Chuck Norris. So you can just get random Chuck Norris jokes without authenticating. And that means that, yes, you could develop a complete front-end only application using jQuery and React and stuff and put it all in HTML and JavaScript and push it to GitHub pages and not have to worry about the backend or Heroku or any of that. Don't do that first. Let's worry about Heroku in the backend right now, since you should worry about that. But I do want to make some time later this week to maybe talk about like pure front-end development and GitHub pages a little bit, and maybe show you all how to put a blog on GitHub pages. I mean, Medium is an okay place to blog too, but GitHub pages has a little bit more developer cred, right? So in any case, we'll chat about that later this week, or again, as always, if you're interested, message me. So yeah, that used to be the case. I think Heroku now doesn't care about how many apps, but it cares about how many hours the apps run. So you can maybe put out an app, but then have it not be actively running, and put out a different app and sort of switch between which app is running when. That's, for now, just start with the one app. If we hit that barrier, we will, as I said, we'll probably just move on to something like DigitalOcean anyway. Heroku is great for just minimal prototyping, my first cloud app sort of thing. And that's our goal for the week. Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about, I've wasted a bit of time myself. I've made upstream contributions to some blog things because they are fun to work with. Yeah, I think that's correct. I think it's 450 hours, but you could make multiple applications. But if you're running multiple applications, you'll burn through those 450 hours quicker. But when Heroku puts the app to sleep, like the reason why it took a little while to load, it doesn't burn the hours. So it only burns through time when you or somebody is actively looking at the application and interacting with it. So hopefully 450 hours is enough to put out a few prototypes and play with things. They changed their pricing model recently. Heroku used to be one free app, unlimited hours, I think. Yeah, certainly if you get publicity, your little Heroku app might fall over. That's one nice thing about like static apps on GitHub. Those don't fall over. Those can take the hit. Don't worry about that yet. That's a good problem to have. If you have that problem, you should just be happy that you have that problem, that your app is so popular that it can't keep up. Anything else? Any other questions? Do people feel like they sort of know what they're doing? Just to reiterate one more time, get yourself to Heroku.com, make an account, and then start from here, probably. Install the things it tells you to install, play with pushing things. You can either push the tutorial shows, let's see here, I think it's on the next step here. So they have their own Node.js getting started application here. And so you can just push this if you don't have, and it's built off Express and it should look familiar. And so this gives you a reference and a thing to push to Heroku. If you have your own thing, push that. That'd be cool. And as I said, push it, tweet it. I bet you we can get Lambda School to retweet it, et cetera, et cetera. But if nothing else, get started with this. So people know what they're doing. If there's no other questions, I'm just going to go ahead and call this. I'll upload these videos in a bit. And as I said, I don't intend to lecture a lot this week. I intend to give you time to actually do all this stuff. So read, think what you'd like to play with, think if there's an API you think is cool, whatever, and start making applications. And I hope that you enjoy. We will cover a bit of relational databases later this week, and I will make some time to talk about like static blogs and stuff, because that's a good topic too, but not right now. So great. I'll stop recording.